Hey, what's up, Nippy fam? This is your girl Tara. It has been a long time since I've done one of these, my homemade podcasts. I just want to give a disclaimer off top. This is not a professional recording. I'm literally recording from my cell phone. So you're going to hear background noise, clicks and clacks, scrubbing, maybe television, maybe notifications from my phone, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, or um, messages, text messages, or whatever. But it's almost 5 o'clock in the morning, so I don't think I'm going to be getting too much of that. I'm up and I'm not really sleepy. I didn't work today, so whatever. I just wanted to do this podcast because I wanted to talk about some things that I don't think I've really too much shared before with other fans. But I wanted to share a few stories with you guys um, that I never really talked about. Right after Whitney died, not too long after Whitney passed, I met this guy through Facebook. I can't remember his name. I will have to go back through my messages. But he contacted me, an older white guy, and we actually ended up exchanging phone numbers, and we talked on the phone for many hours actually. And he actually worked with Whitney on her first two albums, the Whitney Houston self-titled debut album and the Whitney album that came out in 1987. Those two unprecedented, record breaking and shattering, monstrous albums. Um, I want to tell you a story or two that he shared with me. And I know he couldn't have been lying because his stories were too detailed. I mean, this was an older man. What would he have to lie about? Okay, so he told me he was he worked in the studio, like I guess in the mixing and all of that. One of the people who does mixing and stuff, like when you read the album notes or album liners, you'll see people's names that did studio mixing and stuff like that. I can't remember his name off top, but I remember he told me. He said that Whitney was this tall, skinny girl, but she was so beautiful. He said she was flawlessly gorgeous. And he said working with Whitney when she was very young in her career, she was very determined. She was very into her work, very into recording, very into just the music, the musicality of things. He said he saw Whitney years later in the 90s, and it was a totally different Whitney from the Whitney he had worked with in the beginning of her career. But that's neither here nor there. I want to get into, he told me that the stories that we all know about Whitney, how she could go into a studio and do one take, and that would be the final take and end up on the album, like she did with You Give Good Love, How Will I Know, Saving All My Love Saving All My Love for You. We all already know the story with that she did an initial take, and Clive thought that it was too many riffs and runs in it, so he made her redo it or whatever. But the guy, we talked on the phone for several hours, and he told me that Whitney was, he said Whitney was very vocally talented. Yes, we know that, but to hear it come from people she actually worked with makes it that much more meaningful because they were there in the presence of her to witness her greatness. What we heard and saw Whitney was just the outcome. They were actually there during the process. And so, if I could have been a fly on the wall, he said that Whitney would literally come into the studio and she would listen to the demo of the songs that I guess Clive had chosen or whatever. She'll listen to the demo and like she'll sit there and nod her head and like and at that point in time he didn't know what was going through her head as she was listening to these demos. And he said that she would say, "Okay, cut, that's enough. I'm ready to go into the studio." And she would literally go into the studio and knock it out the park. And he was like, So during that time, like when she was sitting there listening to the demos, she was pretty much putting together how she was going to sing these songs, which were totally different. The way she sang them were totally different from the demos. We've all heard the demos of I want to dance with somebody and this and that. And they are totally different from the outcome of how Whitney did them or sang them. Excuse me again if you're hearing these noises in my background. And he said that he worked with a lot of different artists, and he's never seen that an artist that could do something like that. He said people love to write Whitney off because she didn't write music, but he said her voice was its own writer. You know, if you get what I'm saying, he said she could take a sound. She could hear sounds of instruments and things like instrumentations and chords and things like that, and put together what she's going to do in a vocal within like an hour of listening to the demo, or even there were times even less than that. And we know this guy is lying because we heard similar stories from L.A. Reid or Babyface, David Foster. They've all really pretty much said the same thing about Whitney. And I just found the stories this man was telling me about her were just so amazing, and that she would sometimes warm up her vocals, like at the piano, she would do scales. If you don't know what doing scales at the piano is, it's literally when you're at the piano and you're hitting lower keys, higher keys, and you're singing to the tune of that key. So, so you're basically warming up your voice or seeing how high or how low it can go and practicing your vocal skills and things like that. He said that, like I said, she would go into the studio and knock it out the park, and it was always in most cases that take would be the final take that would go into um the on the album. And so I asked him, I was like, well, what about unreleased things? Do you know or do you remember if there were unreleased songs from those two albums? And he said there wasn't really any unreleased songs from those albums, but there were a few times like where she would do alternate takes of the songs. So we probably, you know, have some alternate takes of songs from the first two albums or whatever. And he was like, it was the 80s. Drugs were a big deal in the 80s. He's seen everybody do drugs. He said some of the artists that you think didn't do drugs at least tried it at some point. He said they would literally have parties at Studio 36 or whatever you call that studio, that famous Studio 56 or whatever. And he said they would have cocaine laid out on the table like you would have a buffet. And he was like, she was dabbling or dabbing in drugs at that time, but it wasn't to a point where people would say it was a problem because everybody was doing it. And it was like people were very much functioning while they were doing the drugs and still can go and do their business or whatever. He said that he worked with her on her first two albums, and after that he really didn't work with her, but he saw her later in the 90s, like the late 90s I think it was, during like the My Love Is Your Love era. And he said it was a totally different Whitney from what he first worked with. And I don't really want to go into too much detail about that because I don't want this to turn into a negative thing, but he really spoke highly of her. You know what I'm saying? He really, really spoke highly of her. And at the point or the moral of this podcast is to say that people love to write Whitney off because she didn't write her music, but they fail to realize her voice was just as artistic as a songwriter, because she could take songs other people wrote and interpret them into an emotional conveying experience as if she went through it, and you feel it. We as the listeners, the buying public, we felt every word, every line, every melody of that she sang of these songs. And imagine if she could do that as a non-songwriter. Imagine what she could have done as a songwriter. You see what I'm saying? So people can say this and say that about Whitney and the fact that she didn't write music. But you can't find too many artists that can take songs that other people wrote and take them to the scales that Whitney took them to. We already saw what that came, or how that came about with I Will Always Love You, Saving All My Love for You, All the Man That I Need, and I'm Every Woman, and so on and so forth. When people say these things about Whitney, it doesn't make me look at her any less. It actually makes me appreciate her even more, because you have other people or other artists who write their music and they're still not as emotionally convincing as Whitney. Yeah, that is subjective. It's all a matter of opinion, but it's still my opinion, and my opinion matters. And I'm sure a lot of people share my sentiments. Now, when people say Whitney have a lackluster or average or below average discography or catalog, that's also subjective. But it's probably not more of a popular opinion. I think it's more of an unpopular opinion because millions of people bought her albums instead of her singles. They could have just bought the singles if they didn't like her albums. So I don't care what a critic says about Whitney, or a fan of another diva that hates on Whitney. I don't care what you say about her discography. The numbers prove otherwise. The awards prove otherwise. She's the most decorated female in history with awards, not just in music, but of all time, of any genre, or I mean, of any entertainment avenue. She's the most awarded. So how are you gonna tell me Whitney, who's not a songwriter, has more awards than artists who does write music? That's pretty telling to me if you really want to get technical about these things. I love Whitney's catalog. I love her discography. If there are some things that could have been a little different, yeah, we all probably wish some certain things would have went a little different. But I love every bit of what she did and what she gave us. She gave us music, and she sang it from the heart, and she shared it with the world, and the world appreciated her for it, and they appreciated her for it so much, to the sum of her being the most respected vocalist of our time. You know what I'm saying? She stands tall and above any other female vocalist, and males too, just to let you know. You see what I'm saying? Whenever you hear these greatest of all time singers, she's always at the top. Or if she's not right at the top, she's number 2 or 3. You see what I'm saying? So who cares what haters think? The industry respects the hell out of Whitney. Whitney had so much industry respect, it was ridiculous. This woman could literally just walk out on the stage and present an award and get a standing ovation. A standing ovation like she did at the 2005 BET 25th anniversary, or like she did at 2007 Fashion Rocks, or 1998 Essence Awards, etc., etc. You see what I'm saying? Whitney has been getting standing ovations since the beginning. And I remember someone saying that they were there at the taping when she performed Home on Merv Griffin, and it doesn't show the end of the performance when she performed Home, but she got a standing ovation there. You see what I'm saying? So Whitney is just well respected in the industry. She's always spoken very highly of. You never really hear anybody disrespect Whitney in the industry. The only time I ever really seen anyone disrespect her like that was the chick from a couple weeks ago, Lord, when she posted that bathroom picture or of the bathtub. That's the only time I seen. But she's a nobody. I don't even know who the hell Lord is. I can't even tell you what song she sings. Okay, but yeah, Whitney has a lot of respect. You know, the only people that hate on Whitney are the people that they know she's better than their fave, are the people who are fans of the artists that she's better than. You see what I'm saying? Who cares? Yeah, we should not care what these people on these social media sites say, because outside of social media, none of that shit matters and none of it's true, because she's well respected and highly regarded. So that's what I just wanted to say on this podcast. And I'm probably going to do more of these. We have the upcoming documentary titled Whitney coming up. And oof, we just got word that it's going to be at the Cannes Film Festival. And can't wait till the reviews come out to see if this is probably going to be Oscar worthy. Would love to see a soundtrack come out with this, but don't hold your breath on that. So we didn't get any type of confirmation on that. And so we'll see what happens, and let's see what happens when they get ready to release that official US trailer. So until next time, you guys, thank you for listening in, and one love, and go back and listen to some Whitney Houston. Bye.